The problem's with them. This is the problem with the progressive left. You've all lost your minds.
Sir, for someone who spent 10 minutes arguing why you weren't far right to a straw man, you can certainly allow me 10 seconds to breathe.
Isn't that evidence of your selective empathy on the far right?
This could be prevented, and the reason that it wasn't prevented in this case is simply because of the progressive policies.
Black people get killed every day by black people. It usually doesn't make the news.
So when we say that certain stories are being cherry-picked, it's because it's not reflective of the actual data that shows that crime is down.
There are clear good guys and bad guys. There are clear understandings of what should happen, and no one is disputing what the justice outcome should be.
We apologize for not using the right pronouns. Oh, piss off.
If I knew you were not far right and that would have offended you, I would have never said it.
The death of Irina Zarutska is precisely what happens when cities adopt progressive policies.
When you go on somebody's show called Piers Morgan Uncensored, it might be a good idea, just an FYI, a journalist to journo, right? If you just do a little bit of basic fact checking about who the host is.
Women's stabbing death becomes MAGA talking point.
Right.
No one debates that the guy was wrong. No one debates that she was an awful, awful victim.
I'm astonished, truly, Piers, hearing what I'm hearing today, that it's just not a sexy story. We only cover things that people care about.
In newsrooms, as you know, we often pick stories based on what will get ratings.
As if you shouldn't care about the death of a beautiful, innocent 23-year-old girl.
When a gang member kills another gang member, I don't do a front page story on it. It doesn't lead on my news show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so we're going to debate some crime today. So if you were kind of tired of listening to things about Charlie Kirk and you wanted something a little bit different, this is the place to be, because we're going to get back to what we were talking about before everything that happened with Charlie Kirk. Crime in this country, and how crime is just a right-wing MAGA talking point, which is nonsense, folks. That's what they're trying to portray. Oh, well, crime is down, as a matter of fact. That's what they keep telling us. That's what they keep saying. That's what they keep pushing. That's their agenda. Don't pay attention to what your eyes are seeing. Do not listen to what you are hearing, because your eyes and ears, your senses are lying to you, and you don't know what you're talking about. Just ignore this and get back in your shell, stay in your cave, stay in your lane, shut your mouth, sit down, and just go about your life, because we've got everything under control. That's what Democrats are trying to tell you. The crime is fine. Just ignore it until you get bludgeoned over the head or stabbed in the chest. It's all fascinating, y'all, but we're going to get into all this. So you guys do me a favor and smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new around here and you want to stay up to date with news and politics, because that's what we do. We read news, we analyze that news, and figure out how we're being manipulated by corporate press news articles. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. And if you could, mull it over for me if you don't mind. Click that join button. Sign up and become a member. That's the best way to help this channel grow. I need y'all's support, seriously, especially right now when we're pushing back against the left. We're pushing back against this assault on our democracy, this assault on freedom of speech, this assault on Christian values, this assault on conservatism. We are just being assaulted from all directions. And it must come to an end. We must stand strong. We must stay together. So y'all do all that for me. Let's get into this thing.
Most of the mainstream media, to the point where I posted on X, why is this not getting more attention? It's one of the most shocking things that I've heard or seen in a long time. This innocent young Ukrainian refugee in America on a train, just being cold-bloodedly murdered on a train. And yet it was getting hardly any attention in mainstream media. First of all, on that point, why do you think there was such a collective lack of interest?
Well, there's the obvious and much discussed racial double standard at places like the New York Times and CNN and the progressive media. But I think there's a deeper reason. And the reason is this. The death of Irina Zarutska is precisely what happens when cities adopt progressive policies. And so this is actually a didactic tale of what happens when you have a left-wing government, left-wing decarceral policies, left-wing bail reform, a left-wing magistrate judge who has, by the way, a DEI consultant as she moonlights. And this is what happens. You get people that have 14 convictions, that have diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, in this case, this person's own family, DeCarlos Brown's own family, requested that this person be held in a psychiatric facility, but progressives have demolished all of the places that would have kept people safe. And the end is quite simple. You end up with a girl that is stabbed in the neck on a train. This could be prevented. And the reason that it wasn't prevented in this case is simply because of the progressive policies adopted by Charlotte and really blue cities all over the country.
Mark Lamont Hill, before I get your response to that, I want to play, this is an audio emerged today of DeCarlos Brown talking to authorities, and he was asked why he did it.
She's from the Ukraine. She's from Russia. And, you know, they had a war going on against the United States. So I'm just trying to understand, out of all people, why her?
It ain't, I don't have nothing. They just lashed out on her. That's what happened. They lashed out on her. Whoever was working the material, they lashed out on her.
I mean, Mark Lamont Hill, there seems to be little doubt that this was a man suffering from severe mental illness. That much is evident in the horrific act that he committed of murdering this innocent girl. But the fact that he had been convicted 14 times and was still allowed to just be freely operating on trains in any way he saw fit to then be potentially able to commit this crime, that is a scandal. I mean, you may not agree with Christopher Rufo's characterization of it all being a left-wing problem that's created this, but it is a scandal that somebody like that was out free in that mental condition with that number of convictions, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris that this is a scandal. I agree with you that it's a scandal. I also agree that it's an indictment on public policy. I don't think, though, that this is the result of liberal or progressive policies. It's quite the opposite, in fact. Unfortunately, for decades now, we have divested from mental health resources. We shut down mental institutions, mental homes, mental hospitals. We take out resources for drug treatment and rehab, and we criminalize everything. And so if we had invested in housing, if we'd invested in healthcare, et cetera, we would have the structures and systems necessary to deal with someone so that they don't have to use the subway as a homeless shelter. We could deal with someone whose own family is saying, please give this person some support. If the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And in this country, the only thing we have is hardcore right-wing policies that try to criminalize everything. And the reason, finally, that this isn't a story or hasn't been a national story, I don't think it's the racial angle of it as much as I think there are clear winners and losers. You know, when you and I debate, and you and I debate a lot, Piers, about these stories, it's often debatable, an issue is debatable because we're asking, for example, if someone's getting choked out on the subway, is the rider correct to put the chokehold on, or is or should we be siding with the person who's doing harm on the train? If it's George Floyd, we're debating it because we want to know whether or not the police went too far, but they do have the right to use some kind of force, but did they use too much force? And here, no one debates that the guy was wrong. No one debates that she was an awful, awful victim of an awful circumstance. And I think that's why we don't see more conversation about it, because it's not sexy. It's just an awful, terrible story to I feel great sympathy for.
Well, it shouldn't have to be sexy, should it? I mean, I would ask you, Mark, you lambasted Charlie Kirk in 2020 online. You said you tweeted nothing about what should happen to the officers who killed George Floyd. White supremacist capitalist logic values property over black people. But I could throw back the same thing at you and say, we did a little check and we couldn't find anything that you'd posted about the murder of this Ukrainian woman on a train at the hands of a black man. And the criticism would be that, by not saying anything about this, even as it was raging around on social media, you're making a calculated decision that you don't care very much about this. And the critics of you would say that that is a racial calculation you're making, that when it was George Floyd and it was a white policeman who was committing a heinous crime, I make no pretense about that at all. I said it at the time and believe it now. But when it was that way round, then you were absolutely steaming in on anyone who wouldn't share your view about it and wanted to be publicly very clear about that. But on this, it was like it hadn't happened.
Yeah, I think there's a far more accurate and less interesting answer for that. And the truth is, I didn't hear about the story until recently. And I heard about the story because of the right-wing, vocal right-wing people who were saying, hey, you guys are ignoring this for good reason, or you guys are ignoring this because of a racial agenda.
But this story was everywhere.
And then we began to talk about it.
Hang on, Mark. This story was everywhere. You're a journalist. You're a journalist. You're all over everything, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you weren't aware of it at all for 3 days. Come on. It's me you're talking to.
All I can do is give you the honest answer. And the honest answer is I didn't actually track the story until I started hearing complaints about the story not being covered. And then I did cover it. But I'm saying on the first day, I didn't know about it. Second day, I didn't know about it. That's the honest answer. But if you also look at my record, and I'm sure you did this because you're a devoted journalist, you know that I've covered many stories of white people who've been harmed by black people. I've covered many white people who've been who've faced the death penalty. I've covered white people who were shot by police, unarmed white people who were shot by police.
But my problem here with this, all right, but Mark, my problem with this story, in the way that it's played out, is that it's so easy and so lazy for people to ignore the story in the mainstream media, as they did for several days, completely ignore it, and then only report it through the prism of all these right-wing hate bangers are trying to play the race card with this story, and that's why we're now doing it, which is what they've been doing. I saw some headlines in the New York Times. I saw them on some of the CNN and others. And I was like, wow, what, you think that's the only reason? That's any justification for covering this? Is that because right-wing people on social media are saying it's outrageous that the media aren't covering it? You can point to that as the story. That's the nose. That's the peg. But it's not, though, is it? The peg should be that a beautiful young Ukrainian woman had her life snuffed out on a train, and the video is one of the worst things I've seen in a very long time. And my journalist, as you put it, my journalist head, after many years working in the media on both sides of the Atlantic, is this is a huge story. Not because right-wing people are saying no one's commenting on it, but because it's a disgusting, heinous crime that's happened on a train in America.
Yeah, I mean, the sad part, Piers, is that disgusting, awful crimes happen throughout the country, and they all deserve coverage. But in newsrooms, as you know, we often pick stories based on what will get ratings, what will draw attention, or for some of us who make connections between news feeds.
Just explain to me
broader analysis.
From your perspective, but Mark,
that's the.
Yeah, but Mark, final point to you before I move on to others. But I'm just curious. Why, when George Floyd was killed and that video came out, was there just this collective mainstream media horror that made this the biggest news story of the year almost instantaneously? And yet here, there almost appeared to be the collective opposite response of just almost pretending it hadn't happened. And I don't buy the story that none of them saw it. I saw it. I saw a lot of people talking about it.
I think some
and I was
like,
why is nobody covering this?
Yeah.
This is heinous. So I just think there's a clear double standard there, which I'm really struggling to get my head round.
I don't think that it's a double standard. Again, I think the question is, and that was the third point I was making, is that sometimes when we cover news stories intensely, it's because they become windows into broader debates and issues. In the case of George Floyd, there have been long-standing debates in this country about the extent of police power, about the limitations of police power, about police violence, etc. Also, there's something counterintuitive about police killing somebody who is unarmed. I don't have when a gang member kills another gang member, I don't do a front page story on it. It doesn't lead on my news show. Why? Because one, it happens a great deal and it's awful, but it happens a great deal of time.
How many innocent young women? How many innocent young women are stabbed to death?
Let me finish the sentence. I have no expectation of a gang member protecting and serving me. I do of a police officer. So it becomes a counterintuitive and dramatic story. In this case, I am horrified that this woman was. I think it's awful. And there are many stories about people being killed on trains around this country. The fact that this particular one didn't get told is unfortunate, but I don't think it's because she's white or because the assailant was black. I think, honestly, it's far more cynical than that. I think that people don't care, and often newsrooms pitch to what people care about, and people like sexy stories. They like counterintuitive stories. They like stories of corrupt power, and this isn't one of those things.
Wow.
Now, for once in my life, I totally agree with Mark Lamont Hill. He is spot on with this. But what's fascinating about this is that whilst Mark Lamont Hill is spot on, he is completely ignoring the elephant that's right behind him, that's over there in the corner. That, yes, they don't want to cover these stories because they're, quote unquote, not sexy, right? Because, oh, well, it's not counterintuitive enough because it goes against your narrative that crime is coming down. You don't want to talk about black on black crime, right? He even said it himself. Oh, when a gangbanger kills another gangbanger, we don't talk about that. But why not? Why don't you want to talk about issues that are relative, that are substantive in this country that need to be fixed? Crime is a major issue, but you guys don't want to talk about that because it's not sexy, because it goes against your narrative. Even that what he said at the beginning of this thing, when he was talking about, well, we haven't invested in housing. Like, these people think that low-income housing will stop violent crime. I'm sorry. Like, sure, you know, cheap housing and affordable groceries and all this stuff, that will stop thefts. That will stop low-level crimes, maybe, somewhat. But, right, it's ignoring that evil people exist. It's ignoring the fact that mentally disabled people exist, that psychopaths exist, people that actually have no feeling whatsoever toward another human being and their life. They don't value life. We've been discussing this heavily over the last few days, especially what's happened with Charlie Kirk. And they even mentioned Charlie Kirk right there, but this happened before that happened. So, you know, I don't blame them for any of that right off the top, but it does kind of show how widespread Charlie Kirk's messaging is on this, and that they just want to ignore these problems because it's not sexy enough. They don't want to talk about this because it doesn't suit their agenda. They can't push a narrative. It goes against what they're saying. Oh, the low-income housing nonsense, right? Once again, I take it back to what we were talking about before the whole Charlie Kirk thing is, look, let's dig into that. Mark Lamont Hill, the low-income housing nonsense and cheap groceries and you know, pulling people out of poverty. Has that helped? Has that helped at all? Right? So, according to that logic, there should be zero people from the middle class and the upper crust that commit crimes. But is that the case? Is that the case? No, it's not, as a matter of fact. And also, what's fascinating, talking about black on black crime and, you know, white on white crime. We're talking about all crime in general because race does not really play a part in that when we're discussing crime. Crime happens in these low-income places to low-income people. Why is that? Why would you go rob somebody that has absolutely freaking nothing? Right? Sure, it happens the other way, right? Low-income people rob high-income people, if you will, but that's not always the case. But these issues, these facts, destroy that narrative outright. They destroy those ideas because they're just not set in reality. They don't make any sense when you zoom out and look at everything holistically. They just don't make any sense at all. Sure, that might fix a little small portion of the problem, right? Well, they get this wrong on both sides, to be honest with you, right? More law enforcement, we cannot law enforce our way into zero crime, as a matter of fact. But law enforcement is not just a solution to crime. It is also accountability. It is also justice, if you will, because we need to get justice for what people do. People need to be accountable for their actions. And all this nonsense of blaming, you know, housing or blaming poverty and all these ideas, you know, blaming fatherless homes, which that's a major component. None of that has to do with accountability or justice. That's the underlying issue. But law enforcement is justice for the most part, right? Like, it's also a deterrent. But let's not forget that it's also accountability for actions. It plays both roles. It's not just a solution to a problem. It's also justice, folks. It's also accountability. So let's not forget these things. Let's keep going.
It is to me, let me bring in,
and it is cynical.
Let me bring in Isabel Brown here, because, you know, to me, it is a huge story, and the racial component cannot be ignored because we don't know for sure what the motivation was, and he clearly is mentally ill. However, he was reportedly heard saying, "I got that white girl," after killing her. Which, you know, if it was the other way around,
There's no evidence of that.
That was a beautiful young black girl who had been murdered by a white man who'd said, "I got that black girl," I think all hell would have broken loose in the mainstream media. And I say that as someone who's been in the mainstream media
evidence of that.
for a long time, right? So
it's on video.
It's literally on video, Mark.
Okay, I know that was a brief clip, but I just wanted to point that out because it just shows Mark Lamont Hill is trying to debate issues that he has no idea what the hell he's talking about, right? He should have looked this up before he went into this discussion right here. So I'm going to keep it brief. Let's keep going. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, Dr. Alison Wills, what is your response to the way this story has been covered by the media?
Well, first of all, I would say that I also first heard about it actually from trolls online who made me aware of the story, and they were instantly telling me, "Why didn't you focus on this?" Secondly, I would like to say that the stabbing itself was tragic, and I think that all of us should be sending condolences to her friends and family. I think it's essential to point out that some misinformation has been shared so far. Violent crime is actually down 31% in Washington, D.C., 29% in Baltimore, and 29% also in Charlotte, where this crime took place. So when we say that certain stories are being cherry-picked, it's because it's not reflective of the actual data that shows that crime is down. That being said, also, last month, if we're going to talk about selective outrage, there was a Black woman who was unfortunately stabbed by a white man on a public bus in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And none of the people on this stage so far have addressed that last month. So I think if we're going to call out selective outrage, I think that's fine so we can grow and be better. But I think we have to be honest that the Black woman who was stabbed last month, that luckily she survived, she was randomly stabbed by a white man. I don't tend to think of this as a racial story. That being said, the investigation needs to play out. If this is a hate crime, it should be acknowledged as such. That being said, FBI data shows that Black people are actually the group who are most likely victims of hate crimes in this country. And they're also the most likely to be wrongfully convicted of
why
homicide.
would you be saying that? Why would you be saying that now? I mean, what relevance does that have?
Because I think it's important.
But what relevance does that... Oh, hang on. What
because
relevance...
it's being cherry-picked, right?
But in a way, you're playing a sort of crude form of whataboutery. Because actually, it's got
I'm talking about reality.
All these statistics, you're talking about have nothing to do with her death, right? It's nothing to do with
Well, it has to do with people saying that it's unsafe. People are saying there's a culture of unsafety, and I'm
well, that's not what we're debating. I'm not debating about whether the crime statistics are this, or this.
So you want to debate whether or not we paid attention to the story?
What I'm curious about is why there was a collective refusal to treat this story with the same kind of magnitude that it deserved.
Right, but that wasn't true. So I guess I can't. All I can do is be honest in my point, and I can show you on Twitter. The moment I found out is when someone responded to an unrelated post. I was talking about selective empathy because that's something that I talk about frequently. And they posted it and said, well, I didn't hear you say anything about this. And that's when I started to look into
Have you said
the
anything
story.
about it now on X?
Not yet, but I'm preparing a story. I wanted to investigate.
But why haven't you said
really
anything? I mean, if this, with all due respect, if this was a major story in the national media, as this has become in the last 2 days, and it involved a white man killing a black girl and being caught on tape saying, "I got that black girl," I suspect you would have posted about it. And this plays, and by the way, this works both ways, right? There are people on the other side of this, right, who I would make the same accusation to. Selective interest in stories based on your agenda, your narrative.
So what happened about the story last month in August when the Black woman got stabbed? Isn't that evidence of your selective empathy on the far right to not have called out that story
what do you mean
in the
far,
same way that you're calling out?
Are you saying I'm far right?
Well, I don't know.
Nobody here is
kind of
Have you ever watched anything I've ever done? Do you know anything about me?
I have.
Do you even know who I am?
Watched. Yeah, you're Piers Morgan.
You think I'm on the far right?
I think some things. So I'm a progressive. So let's start there.
Why don't you tell me one far right thing I've ever said?
Well, I feel like you fall into
I'll take one.
Okay. So I think that your line of questioning, your line of targeting comes from a far right political perspective, because it's why you're calling out selective empathy for this, but not the selective empathy last month.
But do you understand when
Correct.
you call somebody like me far right, you instantly lose all credibility? Even Mark Lamont Hill wouldn't say I'm far right, I hope. Would you, Mark?
No, I'd say you're far wrong most of the time.
That's fine. And that's a good joke.
Okay.
But actually,
Well, if I'm wrong about your political ideology,
in a way, Dr. Allison, Dr. Allison, here's the problem. It's a bit like when the progressive left say Trump's the new Hitler. They're all a bunch of Nazis. When you say ridiculous things to try and distract from whatever the particular thing is, you lose all credibility.
Is that ridiculous?
You lose all credibility. When your response to me saying, if it was the other way round, and you had a white man on tape saying, I got that black girl after literally executing her in cold blood on a train, if literally your response is, well, you're far right, that's why you're saying, that's why you're asking me, it is a distracting tool which makes you lose credibility. You're not answering my question. You're just trying to turn it into, well, the only person who would think that is a far right lunatic.
Allow me to answer. No, I don't think you're a far right lunatic at all. I think that there's a certain political ideology that causes you to focus and accuse others of not focusing on this story. When in reality, if we look at just last month in August, there was a similar story where a white man stabbed a black girl. So if we're talking about selective empathy, I provided a perfect example of if that was truly the concern that could have been brought up. And instead of us having an honest discourse about that, if I'm wrong about you being far right, then my apologies. My intention is not to misrepresent you. My intention is to try to understand to the best of my ability.
Oh, you got to wonder why Piers Morgan is surprised and shocked that he's called far right. To a far leftist, which she openly admitted to being by saying she's a progressive. And why is that okay, but being far right is not okay? I don't get that one. I don't get that dichotomy there, if you will, that disparity. Why it's okay to be progressive and far left, but it's not okay to be far right because you're a white supremacist Nazi scumbag. I don't get that one, but once again, folks, like Mark Lamont Hill said, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To a progressive, everything looks far right. Like Piers Morgan is a centrist, for crying out loud. Most people are centrists. Most people on that panel are centrists. Sure, we may lean one way or lean the other way. I would call Mark Lamont Hill kind of in between far left and leftist, right? He's kind of riding that line, if you will, but she seems to be far left. She even openly admits that. But why that dichotomy is so disparate, if you will, like why is it okay to be one and not the other? I don't get that one. But let's dig into these stats. Okay, so after hearing about that, I heard nothing about that incident that took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I went and looked it up. Apparently, it was just completely random. The white dude, right? And he should be strung up for that, to be honest with you. I will be the first to admit that anybody that commits a violent crime like that should be hung out to dry, for crying out loud. But, right, the dude did not go around saying, I got that black girl. He didn't say that. So that takes the racial component out of that. But let's dig into that racial component. Like, she throws out a bunch of stats right there, right? Let's dig in on that just a little bit, right? She says that black people are 7 times more likely to be the victim of a hate crime. Now, I wonder why that is. Well, let's look at George Floyd. That's considered a hate crime, but there's no evidence at all that that was a hate crime. Let's look at Ahmaud Arbery. Once again, another hate crime, but there's absolutely no evidence that that was a hate crime. None whatsoever. This is the problem with just looking at stats and not looking at all of the evidence, not looking at everything holistically, for crying out loud. And that's what these leftists do. They just want to take stats and bludgeon you over the freaking head with these stats and say, look, crime is down. Yeah, but does that say anything about unreported crime? Or does that say anything about all these government officials that are manipulating, that are being investigated for manipulating the crime data to make it look like crime is going down? Is crime actually going down? We can see with our eyes, folks. And does that matter anyway? Like, sure, that's a good thing, but does that mean that we should just stop enforcing crime or stop talking about the crime, for crying out loud? Like, no. It doesn't. Crime is still a major problem in this country. And to say crime is down 30% from a spike when it spiked 70%, you're still in the negative. You're still at a high crime rate. So just saying crime is down doesn't mean a damn thing. It's an irrelevant argument. Let's keep going.
Let me bring in Christopher Rufo.
Let me ask a question for Allison. Allison, you have taught us to look at things through a racial lens. You've taught us not to cherry pick stories that don't reflect underlying statistical and racial disparities. Maybe you can settle this question for us, because under your theory of looking at things through a racial lens, it's relevant in the case of the DeCarlos Brown murder. What demographic group has the highest rate of homicide? And what demographic group in particular has the highest rate of interracial homicide?
So for Black people in this country, Black people are the most likely to be sentenced.
No, answer my question. Which demographic group has the highest homicide rate? And which demographic group has the highest rate of interracial homicide? Simple question.
White and black intraracial crimes are very similar statistically. Among white people,
That's
it's around 80-something%. Around white people, it's around 90%. Look it up. I invite anyone to look it up.
But I'm not asking about intraracial. I'm saying interracial. Which demographic group has the highest rate of homicide and highest rate of interracial homicide? It's a very simple question.
That's white people.
I suspect you know the answer, and why aren't you just saying it?
I said white people. White people are the group that are most likely to commit hate crimes in this country, according to FBI data. So that's your answer.
That's an answer to a different question.
And I provided you the second answer,
and
too.
look, Mark Lamont Hill knows this, you know this, and this is precisely the point that Piers has been making. The reason this story is generating attention, and the reason this story is generating attention in particular after 5 years of George Floyd hysteria, is that the simple underlying fact is this: Black men have the highest rate of homicides in the United States by a long shot, and Black men have the highest rate of interracial homicides against white people, and in particular against white women. This is an ugly statistic. None of us wish it were true. But if we want to talk about disparities, if we want to talk about looking at things through a racial lens, you have to grapple with this fact. This is not an outlier. This is, in fact, statistically
Black people are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder. So if you want to talk about statistics, let's talk about the fact that Black people are 7 times.
Yeah, but with all due respect.
Yes.
Yeah, but also
hang on. Time out.
Okay, so that right there is the problem with pointing out statistics, cherry picking statistics. Like what she is saying, it's not true when you go look it up, but I can see where she would think that, because when you look at the raw numbers, yes, white people are more likely to do this and this and this and that, but that doesn't really speak to anything, does it? Why? Because there are a lot more white people in this country. We make up 65% of the population in this country. Black people make up 13%. So you go look at the data per capita, it's not even close, folks. It really isn't. Rufo was right. It's not even close. Absolutely not even close. And that's the problem with listening to, oh, crime is down 30%. Well, what crime is down 30%? And what does that even mean in the context of crime? Because using a percentage, that can be manipulated. You know, if you've got 2 murders and crime comes down 50%, you've only got 1 murder, for goodness sakes. But if you have thousands or hundreds, I know thousands, that's a little bit hyperbolic, but let's say hundreds, and it comes down 30%. Let's go with 200, for goodness sakes. Comes down 30%. You still have over 150 murders, for goodness sakes. That's still a lot. Like, should we not talk about these things? Once again, should we not try to solve for these issues? We need to fix problems in this country. We don't need to debate statistics and factual realities and cherry picking these things. This is a problem, folks. And this is, once again, it's done on both sides, but the left do this incessantly. They will bludgeon people over the head with statistics and then claim victory that they won the debate because they touted off some statistics or some stupid nonsense. It's like, come on, let's get to the underlying issues here. Let's get to the problems. It's mostly culture. the no accountability for yourself culture in this country, where people try to blame everything from the man, the system. It's the government's fault. It's your fault. He started it. I had nothing to do with this. Let's take accountability for our own actions, folks. I try to instill this into my own son, right? Even if you're sitting at a stop sign and somebody runs into you, you're just sitting there, right? Or you come to a stop and somebody just plows right into you. They didn't see you stopping. They didn't see that stop sign. Nothing. You had absolutely nothing to do with that. You still hold some accountability for that action because you chose to get in your car and drive down the damn street. You chose to be at that intersection at that time when that guy ran into you. Now, sure, that's the minimal amount of accountability that I would put on anybody, but it's still partially you. Partially. Not much, but partially. And we've gotten out from underneath that in this country. Everybody tries to blame everything. That's instantly what you do when you realize you're wrong. You try to say, oh, well, the person's lying, or it's this, or it's their fault, or, they did this to me to make me do this. No, nobody made you do anything. We need to instill accountability culture in this country to these people, right? You can't just blame poverty to solve the crime. Just saying, oh, we need low-income housing, and you think that'll fix anything? No, it won't. Let's keep going.
No, I think that the data I think the data, I won't say it speaks for itself. No data speaks for itself, but I think the data is clear. The numbers are clear. The question for me, though, isn't that. The question for me is why Chris jumps to the conclusion that that's why it wasn't covered. I actually think the data actually supports a different conclusion. Black people are more likely to be killed and to kill, right, in the country. That's Chris's fundamental point, right? We could get into all the sociological and structural factors for why it's not black and I'm not saying Chris said this. It's not black pathology. It's not that we're more prone to kill. We're not naturally or biologically evil.
He didn't say any of those things. He simply mentioned two statistics.
I just said that Chris did not say. Yeah. Piers, here, let me say, I just said I didn't say that Chris is saying that. Chris did not say that. Just listen to me. We don't always have to disagree. We agree on that point. What I'm saying is that news stories and news coverage often does not or do not cover the most prominent or prevalent victims of a crime or the most prominent purveyors of a crime. We often tell news stories for particular reasons. For example, black people get killed every day by black people. It usually doesn't make the news. Why? Because we understand why. There are clear winners and losers. There are clear good guys and bad guys in how we tell the story. I'm not saying it's accurate in terms of how we tell the story. And it doesn't make the headline. Oftentimes, the stories that make the headlines are the ones that are counterintuitive or the ones that force us to examine relations of power. That is why we often, for example, if a police officer gets shot by a citizen, if a gang member shoots a police officer, it doesn't usually make national news and stay on the news for 2 months. Not because we don't care about the police officer dying, but because there are clear good guys and bad guys. There are clear understandings of what should happen, and no one is disputing what the justice outcome should be. When it's the other way around, it gets more complicated, and so we talk about it more on talk shows. That's all I'm saying. It's more complicated than that. And my sister's point a moment ago was an important one, and you focused on the right-wing part and ignored the bigger point she was making.
Because it was a ridiculous comment.
You showed...
Somebody calls me far right. They obviously know nothing about me.
Some people that I know have referred to you that way. So
Piers, you're not far right.
Nobody's called me far right in my entire life. Until now.
I'm sure you've been called far right before.
No, it's okay. I've never been called far right by anybody.
But Piers, even now, you're not allowing me to make the other point, to focus on the other point. You're still focusing on not being far right. We all agree you're not far right. Now let's move to the actual point. Earlier you were saying that if the tables were turned, we would be covering it. And she was pointing out an example of when the tables were turned, and we in fact did not cover it. We as a media group, we as journalists, and even on this show, we don't cover every story.
Okay, but was there, in that case, let me ask Dr. Allison, to be fair, was there a tape which had a clear potential racial motivation to that murder in that other instance?
No, it wasn't filmed.
Okay, so they are qualitatively different in terms of what could be reported. As a former newspaper editor, the moment you have someone on tape saying after they are murdered someone on a train, I got that white girl, there is a clear potential, and I accept the guy was mentally sick, but there is a clear potential racial motivation. And I'm simply saying, and I think I'm saying this from a position of some strength here based on recent history in the way American media cover these stories, had it been the other way round, had it been a form of the George Floyd story, and you had someone on tape in the instance you're talking about saying, I got that black girl, I think it would have been a completely different ballgame in terms of how the media covered it. And so there, to me, is a clear double standard. And that is why I now resent, I'll bring Isabel in here, I really resent the way the mainstream media, having ignored it, are now feeling that the only way they can cover it is to focus on the MAGA influencers, trying to make it a race story, when actually there is a tape there.
Mark Lamont Hill is hitting the nail right on the head with a hammer right here. He's absolutely correct about this, and this is part of why people get radicalized in this country. There's a story I hear about. If you go back 10 or so, 15 years or something like that, when the internet was just getting going real good, and we had Facebook, and we had videos on platforms that you could easily watch, you know, rage sells, for goodness sakes, and rage gets clicks. So these places, they tend to focus on these stories that get a lot of rage, that get a lot of anger, because people get focused. They get angry. They want to know what happened. And people get radicalized by this. And they'll see just a constant stream of like police brutality videos or whatever it may be, right? And they get radicalized, and they think that, you know, all cops everywhere are completely racist, and they're just going around killing black people just widespread all over the place. And that's just not how it is. These regular news stories don't get as much traction because they're not rage inducing, for goodness sakes. They don't get our attention as much. They do get, you know, news stories presented, but they don't catch much traction, once again, like I said, because people aren't paying attention. Oh, it's just another crime statistic, and then they move on right to the next thing. This is how people get radicalized. And the mainstream news, they've been leaning into this more and more and more and more, and it's radicalizing Americans even more and more and more and more and more. We need to come back to reality. We need to realize that, you know, everything isn't virality, for goodness sakes. Everything isn't headline news. Some stories are just bland, and they're not going to get covered. And that tells a story, right? Once again, you look at it like this. Like, think about, you know, your work performance or whatever. Your boss doesn't really care about when you do your job and what you're supposed to do, even when you go a little bit above and beyond. They don't remember those things. They only remember the mistakes that you make. Well, that's how it is with society as a whole. We only remember the bad things. We don't remember the accomplishments that people make, right? Look at Bill Cosby, for goodness sakes. How is he remembered these days? We don't remember this guy that was just an absolute legend in this country. We remember the bad things that he did. R. Kelly, that's another good instance. All of the good music that he made. As a matter of fact, my wife will get mad at me if I play one of his songs, for goodness sakes. And I'm like, separate the man from the music, right? Who cares about what this guy did? Sure, bad, R. Kelly bad, right? But his music has nothing to do with his actions. Let's separate these things, right? Everything doesn't have to be a viral moment, but that is what society is geared towards. Everybody wants to become a star. Everybody wants to be the best. Everybody is only looking for clicks and likes and subscribers and all this other stuff, even myself included, right? I only cover stories that interest me for the most part. But I also cover a lot of news that I think is pertinent to this country, that I think needs to be shown. People need to know about these things. I don't always cover the viral moments, right? I even say this all the time, that a lot of times I don't cover certain news stories because everybody else in the ether is covering these news stories heavily, and I don't. I will make it a point to cover something totally different. Hence this video right here, where everybody is talking about Charlie Kirk, and that's it. I decided, look, I need to bring some different content. We'll go back, we'll talk about some crime, we'll do this. You go look at all of my other videos in my archive. I generally don't cover the main story of the day, right? I'll cover something else, like what Trump did with immigration, or what this judge did, or blah, 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 blah. Other stories that are important to this nation, that are important to politics, that are important to know what's going on so we can be informed. But that's a problem. Mark Lamont Hill is absolutely right. Because the story's not sexy, it doesn't get as much traction. But my other point from the beginning of this video is also pertinent, that in certain instances, people are ignoring certain stories because narrative, because they want to portray some agenda. So they tend to, let's ignore this and let's talk about something else. And even in this case, with this young Ukrainian woman, I cannot believe the media would come out and say that people covering a news story is to cover up for their right-wing agenda. Like, come on, are you being serious with that? Like, they really, really tried to push that narrative. And it's utter nonsense, folks. It really, really is. Let's keep going.
I'm going to ask you a question. Why would a No, Alison, I didn't ask you. I'm asking Mark.
I'm trying to answer your question.
Why would a mainstream media company in America today issue a public apology for misgendering a mass shooter? Explain to me.
Okay, so I feel like I've heard your question. I'd like you to allow me to respond just
I'd love you
10
to
seconds
answer
without
it.
interruption. My answer to you is, again, based on the information you provided, because again, I didn't see the announcement. I'm only basing it on information that you just provided me. So again, so I understand, but Chris was saying, I gotcha. You said you didn't know, and now you know. And I'm saying, I still don't know. I'm only basing it on the information that you provided me right now.
Explain to me why.
So to answer, no. I'm trying to. I am trying to. You don't have to back. You don't have to press me. I'm answering it. I'm happy to answer it. Sir, for someone who spent 10 minutes arguing why you went far right to a straw man, you can certainly allow me 10 seconds to breathe. What I'm saying to you is,
answer the question.
As a news outlet, as a news outlet, you have a responsibility to your audience. If you misgender the person you're talking about in the story, whether it's the good guy, the bad guy, the good person, the bad person, the correction and the apology is given for the audience's benefit, not for the assailant's benefit.
Do you know why the Democrats? Do you know why? Do you know? Hang on. Don't you start shouting.
You've worked. I wasn't done responding.
Do you know why the reason the Democrats?
I have not given. I have not given my. I have not completed my answer. You have not heard my answer yet.
I would like you to allow me to
finish the answer. So, okay, one way to do it is to not talk while I'm answering.
I thought you just answered it.
But just let me finish. And I'm telling you I haven't. Please allow me to finish.
Okay.
Every news outlet issues corrections. And any news story that has been given in my 20 years in news, and I'm sure in your 74 years in news, you know very well that if anybody is misgendered, even if they're not trans, you issue a correction. So it is not uncommon to issue a correction. What is uncommon that you're correct about is that they don't typically apologize. I am simply saying that the apology wasn't, as you suggested, to a mass shooter. I can only imagine that the apology was to the audience because there are many people who are offended by that. And that's why they did it. Is that a political choice? Yes. But that doesn't mean that.
Here's my point, though, Mark. And apology for my language. I couldn't give a fuck if they're offended. I couldn't give a fuck. Why would I care about them being offended about a mass shooter being misgendered? The problem's with them. This is the problem with the progressive left. You've all lost your minds. You've forgotten what ordinary people think. This is why the Democrats are now polling the lowest they polled in recorded history, because they say absolute nonsense like that. It's nonsense. Nobody should ever apologise to a mass shooter for misgendering them. I've got a few things I'd like to call that person, which don't involve his gender, right? Oh, I misgendered him. I couldn't give a fuck. Sorry.
Now, I honestly threw that last segment in there just due to the insane absurdity of that answer right there. This is indicative of how the left thinks. They think that these news organizations should get out there and apologize for misgendering somebody, for crying out loud, but they don't say anything when they get news stories wrong or they manipulate the crap out of everybody. They don't issue an apology for these things. They don't. it's selective outrage when it comes to a lot of these news organizations. And once again, getting back to all that, the manipulation of the corporate press, that is what we do, folks. They are incessant with this. It's on a constant basis. It's just an endless deluge of manipulation, trying to twist the narrative, trying to twist your thought patterns into indoctrinating you into thinking the exact same way that they think, instead of just giving you the facts. They want to portray some sort of a narrative. Why apologize about that? Just issue a correction. Well, there's not even really any point, because the point of that whole thing is they issued a correction. They had it right in the first place because the sex of that person was male. So they got it completely wrong. The correction they issued was actually wrong. So it's not apologizing for anything. They're just lying, folks. That's all that is. They're denying reality. Once again, affirming delusions. And as a matter of fact, just to make sure, I went and looked it up. I went and asked Grok, just for an interesting little tidbit right here. I'm going to post this thing right here. I asked Grok about this, and I had to fight. I said, no, you're lying, Grok. And then it wanted to go into the details about, oh, well, yeah, he was assigned this, and you know, it's just terminology that I was using, the standard term. Like, no, come on, we're all denying reality here, and it's all utter nonsense, and it needs to come to a stop. This is the problem with modern day Democrats. They don't understand this is a losing issue, and we are going to continue to push back on these issues because you're denying reality, you're denying people's biology, you're denying science. We're supposed to be the party of science over here. None of it makes any sense, and we are telling you to your face, stop it. Stop it. This is radicalizing people. You're placing people in a box that they don't need to be in, for goodness sakes. We're trying to help these people. We're not trying to affirm delusions around here. Your gender affirming care, that's a misnomer. You're not caring for anything by affirming a delusion. It's delusion of affirmation. That's what it is. It's not care. None of that is, it's all misnomers with the left. Their language is antithetical to the English language. The way they use it. Oh, it's immigrants. No, it's not. It's criminal aliens. Every time they'll say it's an immigrant. But there's many different categories of immigrants. They don't ever say what. And when they portray that in news stories, specifics, right? Context matters. Context definitely matters. They're quick to say, oh, a white woman killed a black man, or whatever the case may be, right? But why? Why does the skin color matter? It shouldn't matter. Does it? I mean, unless you're trying to identify the person, the suspect that's not in custody yet, sure, then I can see that. But if the suspect is in custody, why do the news organizations, why are they so intent on letting you know the skin color of the assailant and the victim? Why? I don't get that one. Why not just name names? Why do we have to throw race into it? Then it becomes a race issue, and then people get pissed off. It's like they're inducing rage on purpose to garner more clicks. And that's a problem in this country, folks. It's a major problem. That seems to be the MO of the left. It's to garner more clicks. They just want to enrage everybody, it seems like, because everything that comes from Democrats is enraging. And then they call us the misogynists, the bigots. We're just bigots. We're trying to genocide trans people, which is not true at all. That's a disingenuous argument. We're trying to help these people. We're not trying to hurt anybody. It's all nonsense, folks, but I've rambled on for long enough. I think you guys get the point. So y'all do me that favor, smash that like button for me, subscribe if you're new around here. You want to stay up to date with real news and what's actually going on in the world. This is the best place for that. So y'all make sure and do all that. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. And if you're so inclined, I would deeply appreciate if you guys would click that join button, sign up, and become a member. That's the best way to help this channel grow and expand. So y'all do all that for me. And remember, folks, that God is always with us, and he loves each and every one of you out there. So you guys try to remember that, and y'all try to have a good day and stay legitical. Peace.